They entered her in the property ledger under contents of the housekeeper's quarters, third line from the bottom, between a copper bed warmer and 2 wool rugs described as worn. No title, no age, no family name. Only 1 housemaid, indentured, 4 years remaining on bond, included with the estate at no additional cost. As though she were something that had come with the wallpaper, as though she had grown up in these rooms rather than run them, had swept these floors rather than learned to walk upon them, had polished these windows rather than stood at them as a girl watching the autumn light move across the lake her father had loved. Seren Fairholme had been many things in the 3 years since she came to Ashgrove Manor under a borrowed name. She had been invisible, which was the most important thing. She had been useful, which kept her fed and kept her safe. She had learned to move through every room in her childhood home without anyone looking at her twice, which was its own particular kind of grief. She had not yet learned to be property, but it seemed on this particular Tuesday in October that she was about to be taught. The men from the solicitor's office arrived at 9:30, 4 of them, in a carriage that took the long way around the East Drive, as though they were already surveying what they intended to purchase. Seren was carrying linens up from the laundry when she heard the wheels on the gravel, and she set the basket down at the turn of the servant's stair and watched through the narrow window as they climbed out. 4 men, dark coats, a leather satchel each. Behind them, a 5th figure stepped down from a separate, plainer carriage. And it was the plainness that stopped her, because men with reason to look important always arrived in something that announced them. This man arrived in a vehicle that said nothing at all, which was a different kind of announcement entirely. She could not see his face from where she stood, but she saw the way he looked at the house when he stepped down, not admiring it, not assessing it the way the solicitors were already doing, measuring the stonework with their eyes. He looked at it the way a person looks at something that has been described to them, checking the description against the thing itself, finding where the two agreed and where they did not. Mado. Seren picked up the linens and went back to work, because a housemaid who stopped working had a reason to explain herself, and she had survived 3 years in this house precisely by never needing to explain herself to anyone. Her mother had been dead since Seren was 6. Her father, the Viscount Fairholme, had died 4 years ago when Seren was 18, taken by a winter fever that moved through the estate in December and did not stop at the master's door. He had been a quiet man, studious, happiest in his library, the kind of father who forgot to feed you but remembered to teach you Latin and the names of every star visible from the upper meadow. She had loved him in a way that was still, 4 years later, a bruise she pressed without quite meaning to. After his death, his younger brother Gervais Weld had come to settle the estate and found himself, with the stroke of a solicitor's pen, the new Viscount, because the only other heir was a daughter, and daughters did not inherit titles, and the land was entailed to the male line, and that was the law, and the law, Gervais had told her pleasantly over dinner the week after the funeral, was a tremendous comfort in difficult times. What the law did not require was that Gervais strip the estate of its best furnishings by selling them quietly to private collectors. What the law did not require was that he discharge the senior staff and replace them with people who owed him money. What the law did not require was that he use the income from the Fairholme tenants to fund a house in London that had nothing to do with Ashgrove and everything to do with Gervais Weld's ambitions. And what the law certainly did not require, had not anticipated, had no mechanism for, was that 3 years ago Gervais had told Seren, pleasantly again, always pleasantly, that she could remain at Ashgrove in a reduced capacity if she wished, that her room and board would be covered, that he would arrange the paperwork, that it was really the most sensible solution for everyone. And she had said yes because she had no money and nowhere to go, and the estate was the only home she had ever known. And she had signed the bond he put before her under the name he suggested. Sarah Weld, a housemaid, 4 years indentured, included with the estate at no additional cost. She had not understood then what included with the estate meant until she heard the solicitor read it aloud this morning, 3 floors below, in her father's study, to the men who had come to buy the house that had always been hers. She heard it through the floor. She was making up the guest room directly above the study, and the voice carried up through the old boards, as clearly as if he were standing beside her. "One housemaid," he said, "indentured, 4 years remaining, listed under household staff as a fixture of the property, to be transferred with the estate." A pause. "Sir, I want to clarify this entry. A person is not customarily listed as a fixture." "She's bonded to the house," Gervais said. "Same principle. Cheaper to pass her along than to pay out the bond and hire again elsewhere. It's irregular. It's documented." Gervais's voice had its particular warmth, the one he used when he wanted to make an obstacle feel foolish for being an obstacle. "The bond was witnessed. Check with my man Price if you like. But let's not waste the afternoon on a housemaid when there are 3 tenant farms to go through." The sound of a chair, not pushed back, pulled forward, the small, precise sound of a man who has been listening and has decided to do something other than listen. "Who is she?" said a voice Seren had not heard before, quiet, level, the kind of quiet that does not need to be loud to fill a room. Gervais paused. "I beg your pardon?" "The person listed here. What is her name?" "A beat, Sarah Weld. She came to us 3 years ago." "Weld, a silence, your own name." A distant connection, entirely common in these situations. Country families, you understand. "I see." Another silence, then continue. Seren stood very still in the guest room with a pillow in her hands, and understood that the man from the plain carriage had just heard her name. The false name, Gervais's name, the name she had signed on the bond she had not read, and had said nothing further and continued listening. She could not have told you why that felt like something more than nothing. But it did. When the dining room emptied, she carried the untouched refreshments back to the kitchen and told Mrs. Ansley, the cook, that she had a headache and would finish the upstairs rooms before supper. Mrs. Ansley, who had worked at Ashgrove for 20 years and had known Seren since she was 9, looked at her for a long moment and said that the guest room linen closet needed reorganizing, and that reorganizing a linen closet was the kind of task best done slowly, and that the guest room was at the end of the east corridor, which had a window overlooking the drive, and that Seren should take her time about it. Seren took her time about it. From the window she watched the man from the plain carriage walk the grounds with Gervais. She watched him stop at the kitchen garden wall and say something that made Gervais's posture change. She watched him turn toward the stables and then turn back, very deliberately, and say something else. She watched Gervais smile and spread his hands and say whatever Gervais always said when he wanted to reassure someone that there was nothing to see here, nothing at all. She watched the man look at Gervais for a long moment without expression, and then turn away. She was summoned that evening. Not by Gervais, by the stranger's man, a gray-haired steward who came to the kitchen door and spoke quietly to Mrs. Ansley, and Mrs. Ansley called Seren out of the scullery and told her in a voice, carefully stripped of everything except the facts, that Lord Haverstock wished to speak with her in the library before supper, alone, and that she was to go directly. "Lord Haverstock," Seren said. "He's the buyer," Mrs. Ansley said. She kept her eyes on the pot she was stirring. And Seren. A pause on the name, the real name, the one she had always used in the kitchen when Gervais wasn't within earshot. "I've known you since you were a child. Go in there with your head up." Seren went. He was standing at the window when she came in, and he turned when he heard the door. In the lamplight he was younger than she had thought, perhaps 32, 33, with a face that had learned at some point not to show what it was thinking, and was working at that lesson still. There were lines around his eyes that did not come from smiling. He looked like a man who had made a habit of arriving places and finding them different from what he had been promised. He looked at her for a moment without speaking, not in the way men sometimes looked at housemaids, the way a man looks at something he has been trying to remember. "You were listed in the inventory today," he said. "Yes, my lord." Her voice was steady. She had decided in the corridor that it would be. "Under fixtures and fittings." "Yes." "Between a copper bed warmer and 2 wool rugs." "Yes." He turned back to the window. "I have purchased a great many properties in my life," he said. "I have never before purchased a person. I believe Mr. Weld considers the distinction minor." He made a sound that was not quite a laugh, but was near to one. "Mr. Weld would." He turned again to face her. "I have something to tell you, and I want you to hear it before Gervase Weld has the opportunity to shape what version of events reaches you. Will you sit?" She sat, not because she was biddable, but because her legs had decided to be sensible, regardless of what she intended. He reached inside his coat and produced a letter. It was old. The paper had softened at the folds in the way of something, read many times, and carried a long while. "Your father wrote to me," he said 4 years ago, shortly before he died. The room tilted slightly. "We were at school together," Lord Haverstock continued, "and at university. I had not seen him in some years when the letter came. We had fallen out of correspondence the way men do when life becomes busy and convenient. When I wrote back, his reply came from a solicitor telling me he had died. He held the letter out. He wrote to me because he was afraid. He had amended his will to name you co-trustee of the estate income. Not the title, he could not change the entail. But what money there was, he meant for you to manage it jointly with whatever heir took the title. He was afraid the amendment would be challenged. He had reason, I think, to be afraid of his brother." A pause. "He described you in the letter. He wrote that you were 22 pages into a novel about a botanist, that you could name every constellation visible from the North Meadow, that you held your teacup the way your mother had, and that you went very quiet when you were angry, which he found alarming in the best possible way." Seren could not speak. "He also wrote," Lord Haverstock said, more carefully now, "that he had given you half of a small ivory portrait frame, that he kept the other half, that the 2 halves together showed him and your mother as they were on their wedding day, and that if anyone ever questioned who you were, a woman who could produce the daughter's half of that portrait had been given it deliberately by a father who knew exactly what he was doing." Something cold and clear moved through her. She knew the portrait. She had kept it hidden for 3 years in the lining of her winter coat. It was the only thing she had taken with her when Gervase rearranged her life. A small piece of ivory no larger than her palm, showing 2 faces, a woman she barely remembered and a girl she had once been. On the back, in her father's handwriting, one name, her real name, the one Gervase had replaced with Sarah. "Where is your half?" Lord Haverstock asked. "Upstairs," she said. "In my coat. I've kept it sewn into the lining because it was the only thing I had." Her voice broke very slightly, which she had not given it permission to do. "I didn't know it was proof of anything. I thought it was just a thing that was mine." Something moved through his face and was quickly composed. "Go and get it," he said quietly. "Please." She went up by the back stairs. Her winter coat hung where she had placed it in September, in the servant's closet at the far end of the hall. She reached into the lining, into the careful seam she had unpicked and restitched 100 times. and her fingers closed on the piece of ivory that had lived there so long it had taken on the warmth of the cloth around it. She brought it down. She set it on the library table between them. Lord Haverstock reached into his coat and produced the other half. She had never seen her father's half before. She had only known it existed from the one time he had shown her hers, when she was 12, and told her it had been made from a miniature portrait of her parents, that he had broken the ivory frame himself and kept one half for the safe keeping of each of them, and that she was to keep hers and never lose it. She had thought it was a game, a child's sort of secret-keeping. She had not understood it was a contingency plan. The two halves fit together without a seam. The image that formed was small and precise and complete. A man and a woman, painted in the formal manner of the previous generation, their expressions composed but with something warm underneath, their hands almost touching at the lower edge of the frame, and on the back of her father's half, in the same hand as hers, the full name, his name, and hers beneath it, and beneath hers the date of her christening. Lord Haverstock said nothing for a long moment. "We have the letter," he said at last. "We have the portraits. We have 3 years of your presence in this house, which the staff can attest to, and tomorrow morning, before any other business, I am going to write an amendment to the deed of transfer that removes your entry from the inventory entirely and formally places you under my protection as a free individual, status to be determined by law." He looked at her steadily. "I am going to do this first, before Weld understands what I intend, because men like your uncle move quickly when they understand they have been found out. I would rather the paperwork precede him than chase him." She understood what he was doing. She was grateful, and she was also afraid in a way she had not permitted herself to be until this moment, because something she had kept pressed down for 3 years was trying very hard to become hope, and hope was a far more dangerous thing than the cold, dull weight of simply surviving. "He won't accept it," she said. "No," Lord Haverstock agreed, "he won't." He didn't. By morning, the amendment was written. Lord Haverstock had sat in the library until past midnight, and when he was finished the document was witnessed by 2 members of his own household staff and signed before the sun was fully up. By afternoon, Gervase Weld had made 3 visits to his solicitor in the village and sent 2 letters north, and by the following day a document arrived from a court in the county where his friends sat on the bench, declaring Seren Fairholme, named properly for the first time in 4 years in an official paper, to be an impostor and a fraud, a woman of no birth or standing who had fabricated a claim to the Fairholme estate by manufacturing a portrait and conspiring with a susceptible nobleman who had, the document strongly implied, been taken in by a clever servant. The portrait, Gervase's lawyers wrote, was a forgery. The letter from the deceased Viscount was a fabrication. The bond Sarah Weld had signed was legal and witnessed and had been in continuous operation for 3 years. The girl in Lord Haverstock's library was a housemaid who had overheard enough to construct a story. And the real Seren Fairholme had died with her father 4 years ago, and there was a register entry to prove it. Seren sat in the library and listened to Lord Haverstock's solicitor read the document aloud and felt the cold move through her in a slow wave. She had not known Gervase had registered her as dead. She had not thought of that. She had been so occupied with surviving that she had never considered what story Gervase had built in her absence, or how long he had been building it, or how much he had paid to have it stand. 4 years, Lord Haverstock said, setting the document down. He was not defeated, but he was tired in a way he had not been the night before. He's had 4 years to prepare for this. Every document we produce, he will produce an older one. The register predates everything. He has people, she said. The magistrate in Rensley is his cousin's husband. The physician who would have signed the register has been treating the Weld family for 30 years. I know. He was quiet, his hand resting on the amendment he had written before dawn. But he does not have this. He touched the paper. This was signed and witnessed before he knew what I intended. It is a legal amendment to a completed transfer of property. It is, as it stands, the oldest document in this particular dispute. And it says one specific thing, that you are a free person, not a fixture, that your status is to be settled by law. She understood what he meant. She understood it. And she saw the shape of what he had done before he had known why he was doing it. You wrote it before you knew the whole story, she said. I wrote it, he said quietly, because when I read that entry in the inventory, I read it a second time to be certain. I had not misread it, and I had not, and I put down the paper, and I thought, whatever else is true about this house and everyone in it, I will not put my name to a document that treats a person as though she is furniture. So I asked the solicitor to prepare the amendment. I did not know yet what I was protecting. He looked at her. I only knew that it needed protecting. The writ arrived 2 days later. 2 men from the county court, polite and unhurried, with a leather folder and a closed carriage on the drive, come to take one Sarah Weld, alleged impostor, to answer for her fraud before the court that had issued the order. Lord Haverstock argued with them in the great hall, and Seren stood against the wall in her housemaid's gray and watched him, and thought with a clarity that surprised her that he had been faint for her since the moment he read her entry in the inventory, before he had any reason to, before he knew anything except that a name appeared in a ledger between a bed warmer and 2 rugs. She is under my protection, he said. This house is my property, and she is. The writ names her, my lord. Your protection does not supersede a court order. You cannot serve a writ for property, Lord Haverstock said, and his voice had changed, the same way it had changed in the library 2 nights before. He crossed to the writing table without raising his voice, without any change in pace. Because property cannot commit fraud. Property cannot impersonate anyone. If she is what your writ says she is, a housemaid, a fixture of this estate, then she has no agency, and you cannot charge her as though she does. But if she is a person capable of fraud, then she is a person, and persons are not transferred with real estate, and her name should never have appeared on that inventory at all. He picked up the amendment and turned it to face the officers. 3 days ago, before any writ existed, before any claim of fraud was made, this amendment was signed, witnessed, and filed with my solicitor. It predates your document. It states that the person entered as a fixture of this estate is a free individual, whose status is to be determined by law and not by ledger. It is the oldest filed document in this proceeding. You cannot execute a writ for property that was declared, in writing, to be a free person 3 days before your writ was drawn. The senior officer took the paper. He read it. He turned it over. He read it again. The way a careful man reads something that changes what he is about to do, making certain he has read it correctly before he acts upon it. He was quiet for a long moment. I'll take this back to the court, he said at last, for review. You will, Lord Haverstock said, and while they review it, you will inform them that Lord Haverstock is prepared to bring into open proceeding a letter written by the late Viscount Fairholme, a matched pair of portrait miniatures documented in the Guild Registry 32 years ago, the testimony of 3 members of this estate's long-serving staff, and a complete accounting of the financial transaction conducted by Gervase Weld against Ashgrove over the past 4 years, which accounting makes very interesting reading indeed. He paused. Tell them we welcome an inquiry, an open one, where questions may be asked about a register entry and who arranged it, and about a young woman who was declared dead and somehow failed to cooperate with the declaration. The officer left. The carriage went with him, and it carried no one. Gervase Weld, when he learned the matter would be heard in open session before a bench he had not been able to arrange, made the error that careful men only make once. He produced the portrait miniature himself. The half he had taken from Seren's coat during the 2 days after Lord Haverstock's amendment was filed and before the legal proceeding began, hoping to argue it was proof of her deception, hoping to demonstrate he had found a forgery in her possession. He produced it in his solicitor's office with 3 witnesses present, which meant 3 witnesses could confirm he had it, which meant 3 witnesses knew he had removed it from a house he no longer owned, which was a violation of the transfer agreement on top of everything else. And his solicitor told him so in terms that were unusually direct for a man being paid by the hour. The case went to open court in the spring. Lord Haverstock's amendment entered the record first, because it was oldest, and because an amendment to a filed deed of transfer is a matter of official record and cannot simply be overwritten by a more recent document. Gervase's lawyers argued that the portrait was a forgery. Lord Haverstock's lawyers produced a miniature painters' guild entry from 32 years prior, documenting a commission from Viscount Fairholme for a matched pair of ivory portraits, described in precise and unambiguous detail. The register of Seren Fairholme's death was shown to have been witnessed by 2 men, the local physician who had treated the Weld family for 3 decades, and Gervase's own land agent who had remained continuously on the Weld payroll in the 4 years since the death. The judge asked several questions about this. The land agent offered the choice between answering those questions and answering considerably worse ones elsewhere, chose honesty, with a speed that suggested he had been considering it for some time. Gervase Weld went to prison. He had spent 4 years on a fortune that had never been his, and the law, when finally permitted to examine what he had done with it, was not gentle about what it found. The estate came back to Seren in June, formally and in writing, her real name spoken aloud in a courtroom, and entered into the official record for the first time since she was 18. It felt strange. She had answered to a borrowed name for so long that her own sat differently in her mouth, the way a word in a language learned in childhood feels when you return to it after years away, familiar in your bones before it is familiar on your tongue. Mrs. Ansley moved back to Ashgrove with her, and 2 of the older tenants came to the door the first week and stood with their hats in their hands and said they had always known, which was not precisely true, but which she understood to mean that they were glad, and she let it stand. Lord Haverstock visited in August. He stayed a week, and at the end of it, on an evening, when the kitchen garden was still warm from the long day's sun, and the lake her father had loved was going copper in the low evening light, he told her plainly what he had been thinking since October, and she told him plainly what she had been thinking since the night he had laid the 2 halves of the portrait together on the library table, and the image had become whole, and there was no need for much elaboration after that. They were married the following spring. Neither of them cared for large weddings, having both spent too much time being assessed and arranged and counted by other people to have any enthusiasm for a ceremony that was primarily about spectacle. The ledger page hung in the library at Ashgrove, framed on the wall beside her father's bookshelves, the ones Gervase had left undisturbed, by oversight or by some dim instinct that they were the one thing in the house he had no right to touch. Visitors sometimes found the frame and read down the careful list of furniture and silver, and came at the end to the entry between the bed warmer and the rugs, and went quiet. Then they read the amendment beneath it, written in a different hand, the hand of a man who had arrived in an unmarked carriage one Tuesday in October, and read an inventory all the way to the bottom, and found a person entered among the fixtures. The individual listed above is not property, it read. She is entered in this amendment as a free person, her status and rights to be determined by law and not by ledger. Signed this day, Haverstock. The portrait sat on the writing table beneath it, both halves fitted together, her parents' faces small and clear and complete in the ivory. Her father had not known, when he commissioned it, that it would one day be evidence. He had only known that he wanted her to carry something of them both, something small enough to keep, something that could not be taken from her without someone noticing the taking. He had understood more than she had given him credit for. She stood at the library window on a morning in April, the lawns going green again after the long winter, and she picked up the pen from the writing table. Not any pen, but the one Lord Haverstock had used to write the amendment in the small hours of a morning before he knew the full measure of what he was doing. And she turned it in the light and thought about a Tuesday in October, and a man reading a ledger very carefully, and the particular quality of the silence in that dining room, when he reached the last line and read it a second time. He had not known her then. He had known nothing, except that a name appeared in a column where names should not appear, between objects that did not breathe, and he had set the ledger down and asked for a pen and corrected the record before he understood what he was correcting, because some things do not require understanding before they require action. She set the pen down on the table. Outside in the kitchen garden, Mrs. Ansley was arguing cheerfully with one of the groundskeepers about the placement of the new herb beds, and the lake was going silver in the morning light, and Seren Fairholme, her father's name, her mother's name, her own name, spoken and written and official and real, went down to see to the day. No longer a fixture, no longer a line between a bed warmer and two rugs. Just a woman in her own house walking into the spring.